Hello, everyone. Today we are continuing on with our N4 lessons. And in the previous lesson, we talked about koto, that magical word koto that has all these weird different usages in it. But at its core, at its very core, it often will take verbs and change them into nouns. In English, we usually have two forms. We say like to swim, or we say swimming. I like to swim, because usually you say I like, and then you put a noun after that. I like pizza. I like curry. But I like to swim, or I like swimming. Those are our two ways of nominalizing verbs in English. And in Japanese, we have no and we have koto. And we're going to continue with koto today, focus on that, and get a few more of the more common usages mentioned and practiced. So let's get that started. You can see here we're going to talk about dekiru a little bit, and we're going to talk about using aru and nai. So two different patterns for today's lesson. So let's jump into that. The first one is, as you might have guessed, we're going to work on dekiru. And this is another way to talk about potential, talk about the ability to do something. And real fast, just as a review, we've talked about this before, the other one. What is the other way of saying like I can or I can't do something? So if you, for example, let's use the word taberu. Taberu. And you want to say I can eat sushi. Usually if you say I eat sushi, we'd say this. But how about I can eat sushi? Does anyone remember how we would change that verb over to the potential form to say can? Any ideas? See one person typing. Again, if you ever have comments or you think you know the answer, you can just type them right into the VC events channel. There's, no pressure to do so. And I love, more than anything, getting many people answering one question, even if it's the same answer over and over again. So, real fast as a review. So, we have, thank you, the first person. And if you are typing out the answer as well, keep typing it, even if someone else has typed it out before you. I don't care. Typing it out is a way to get the neurons in your head tied a bit more tightly together around that concept, around that word. So we have taberareru. Or, no one mentioned it, but there's the shorter form of tabereru. But anyway, both of these are ways of saying the potential. I can eat. And I don't have data to back this up, but I would say the form that we just mentioned in the channel, this one is used more for ability, as in something you are capable of doing because of skills that you may have, for example. The one we're learning today can be used in that way, but there's another usage that I feel is a bit more common, and we'll get into that. So this is another way of saying can or be able to. So let's take a look at how we actually put them together, and then we'll practice it ourselves. So in Japanese, in English we can say I can swim, and we have that special helper can. It's a helper verb that you attach to other verbs. However, in Japanese we have the tabereru or taberareru that we had before, but in this situation, when we're using koto, we're switching it over to a noun. So let's take a look at these two examples. The first one, we have the verb oyogu, and we don't need to change that one over into the potential form. we're taking it and we're using koto to switch it over into the noun. So if we were to say this really, really literally, we could say swimming is something I can do. Dekiru is your kind of your generic, it's not generic exactly, but you can think of it as a general I can do verb. More technically, suru is the potential form of suru. Suru is to do, and dekiru is to be able to do. Your generic do verb. And so here we have oyogu koto ga dekiru. It's saying, oh, swimming? Yes, I can do that. And so you don't need to don't need to change anything else with the verb. And of course, we'll see this in the next panel, but you're never going to change that verb. For example, if you want to talk about not being able to swim, you wouldn't change oyogu to oyoganai. You're going to change that verb on the end. So dekiru is the positive form. Dekinai or dekimasen would be the negative form. Now, interestingly, there's one more version that you see quite often. If you have a noun that represents an activity, it represents an action, you can use it like this. Karate or karate, I can do that. So, karate ga dekiru works just fine. Now, you cannot use that for any verb, or any noun, but nouns that represent sports are very common, or other activities. And so, for example, this word, I'm going to give you the kanji. It's kind of hard. But does anyone know what this word is? I'll give you a hint inside the spoiler. Any ideas what this means? I don't think it's N4 level. It's probably N3 or thereabouts. So if you don't know it, you're totally fine. But it's probably something that you do all the time without realizing it. Yes, it's translate, tsuyaku. So if you could say, it might be a longer sentence. You might be saying, I can do Japanese translation, but this is an activity. So you could say, tsuyaku ga dekiru. However, you would probably not say, for example, this. You wouldn't say, hon ga dekiru. Because hon is, it's an actual object. It's a thing. It doesn't really represent, an action. But if it's an action noun, something that you say, oh, I can picture that in my head and I can see someone doing that thing, then we can put it inside of or in front of dekiru. So let's look at a few more examples, something slightly longer. So, kanji o yomu koto ga dekimasu ka? You're saying, can you read kanji? And specifically with this, I personally feel that compared to if we're talking about ability, is this something you have the ability to do? This feels a bit more polite to me. As in, polite in the sense of I personally wouldn't use this if I was talking to, say, a friend. I'd probably say the yomemasu ka? Use a normal potential form that we use. This one, I feel like it comes out in more polite or formal situations. But again, this is just a feeling that I've built up over the years, and so I don't have data to point you at and say, this is absolutely the case, or it isn't the case. One more example. If you wanted to very simply say, I don't, Chugokugo isn't itself an activity, but you can see it representing an activity, the speaking, the reading, the writing, the understanding. And so you might say 中国語ができない if you cannot understand or speak Chinese. And you can see here, we used it in the casual form, できない, できますか? And you can use it with any of those. Now, I mentioned earlier that I personally feel that the potential form, when you change the verb itself, is more common when it's used with ability. And I said this one that we're learning today is more common with something else. Let me show you what that something else is. Now, when we talk about can do something or be able to do something, we're actually talking about two different things. We're talking about the possibility of something, right? And, if we say, 泳ぐことができる or 泳ぐことができません. You can swim or you can't swim. Why could you possibly swim or not be able to swim? There's two key areas. One of them is what we were just talking about, ability. For example, I never learned to swim, so I cannot swim. The other one often is because of usually a sense of permission or the possibility due to the situation around you. And that one I feel is much more common with this koto ga dekiru pattern. What I mean by that is, let's look at this. So if I said, ここで泳ぐことができません, I might be referring to, there's a pool, and I'm talking to you, and you, whoever I'm talking to, you can swim. You are capable of swimming. So here, I'm not saying, hey, you, I don't think you can swim here. Your stroke is not strong enough. You're going to sink. I'm not talking about that. I'm saying because of some other reason, you're not able to do so. That could be because it's a rule. For example, this pool is only for children under the age of 3. It's a little kiddie pool. So for you, an adult that I'm speaking to, you cannot swim here. It could be because it is literally impossible. I could say, oh yeah, there's some gyms in the town. This other gym has a pool. It's great. However, this gym here that we're talking about now, there's no pool. Therefore, you cannot swim here. So this one is showing you that there is no possibility of that action taking place because of a rule, because of the situation, but not because of the listener or the speaker, whoever, their ability to do so. And again, I feel like this one is much more common with this version, showing the possibility. So let's take a look at one more example before we continue on. Now here, we're using that noun that represents an action. So kaiwa. What is kaiwa, by the way? The answer's on the screen, but just give someone a chance to answer. What is kaiwa? Thank you. Yeah, it's conversation. So again, kaiwa is a noun, but you can picture it in your head and you can see people doing it. 2 people, 3 people, 10 people talking. And so here, if you say, 日本語の会話ができる, you could possibly be saying, oh, I am capable of having a Japanese conversation. But before, and without context, you don't know which one it might be. But in this situation, why do you think the speaker might say this? Like, what type of place might we be in where they would say this? If we're talking about the possibility of having a Japanese conversation, why? It might be a rule. It might be that, oh yes, you're allowed to speak in Japanese here. But what are some other situations where this might be applicable? Any ideas? Where might we be, or when might we be, where someone could say, oh yes, 日本語の会話ができる. Sure, yeah. Of course, if you're in Japan, you probably have the possibility to have Japanese conversations, probably more so than anywhere else. What else? I see a couple of other people typing. Maybe we have a couple of other answers. Schools, businesses. Yeah, maybe your business is involved in trade, or you have a bunch of Japanese clientele. And so you say, yes, if you take this job, you're going to be able to have Japanese conversations, or maybe you have to have them because many of our clients are Japanese. It might be an after-school Japanese club where someone is trying to sell you on the club, and they say, yes, we have Japanese only time once a week, and so you can have Japanese conversations here. Whether or not you can put the words together and make those sentences, that's a different story. However, in terms of the possibility, yes, that definitely works. So we have both of these versions. We can talk about the ability. I can do this because I can have a Japanese conversation because I've studied Japanese. Or we can talk about I am in a class with Japanese exchange students, so I can have a conversation in Japanese. It can go in either way. And frustratingly, to all of us learners, you might not know, with a sentence by itself, what which one it is. And this really hits hard when you're learning the language. When you're learning it in Renshu or in any of the other apps out there, because most places, example sentences come in a sentence. But do we speak in a sentence? No. We speak in sentences, 5, 10, 20, 100. And although you might be thinking, oh, which one should it be? Is it the ability or is it the possibility? It's going to be clear from the rest of the conversation, which one it happens to be. And I always tell people that say, well, which one does it mean? I think of it in the same way that if someone said these two words or one of these two words, red or red, there's almost no situation where you wouldn't know which one they were talking about. Not impossible, of course, but even hearing the same word, you'd say, oh, because of the other words around it, the other sentences around it, it makes sense. And this one will be the same way. It's just sometimes we keep these sentences simple, and so we say, okay, here's a single sentence and not a long conversation. So, I'm not quite sure which one it is. But don't worry about that. Someone had a question about the structure of the sentence. I mean, I'm not quite sure which part of the structure you're looking at. I mean, the examples we have on the screen are full examples, but if this helps you, the verb, everything else would come in a normal sentence. The subject, the verb, the location, all your other particles, all of that all comes first. And you can almost think of koto ga dekiru as a suffix. Now, that's not technically true, but in the sense of understanding the structure, it absolutely is. It's going to come at the end of everything else. So the situation, the action you're describing, and all the other words that you need to describe that action, location, place, who it's being done with, that all comes before. So let me give you a quick example. Okay, I put 2 lines. The second line is the sentence we already have on the screen. The first line is what I added. このクラブで日本人と 日本語の会話ができる. So, at this club, in this club, with, I'm reading it not literally, not in the natural order. In this club with Japanese people, you can have a Japanese conversation. And so there's no limit as to what goes in front of that. You could put a time as well. You could say, just today we have some people visiting, so just today in this club you can speak with Japanese people. It's basically the entire sentence is going in front of there, describing the action, and then that action, yes, it's possible or it's not possible. I hope that helps. Okay, let's continue. We didn't do any practice on this one because I want to focus on the next one. I feel like it's much more common and it's also more fun to use. So let's continue on with the next one. Now this one is actually, there's several steps to this. So let me not say everything. This is not the one I want to focus on. This is part 2, and there's one more part after this. This one, we're using the same koto ga that we used before, but we're talking about aru. Now, aru, let's think about aru. What do we usually use aru for? We usually use it to describe the presence of physical things. Well, not always physical, but usually. There is a book. There's a robot standing in front of me. There are several houses at the corner of this intersection. However, we can use aru here as well to describe the existence of actions. How can actions exist? In the sense of, we use this to talk about things that may happen. Things that may happen. And when I say may, and this is the most important part of this, because these are actions that happen, but they're not something that happen all the time. So for example, if I have a son, as many of you know, and he plays with his friends a few times a week, if we let him every day. And so it's a common thing. And so here, we would not use this to describe, there are times when Leo plays with his children, with his friends, because it's a common thing. However, if I, let's have an example. There are some other friends that we have that don't go to his school. They live relatively nearby, maybe 15 minutes away, and we play with them sometimes. It's not common, but there are times when we play with them. This would be perfect for that. So we're talking about an action that happens occasionally, but not often. You would not use this to describe a routine, a daily thing, or even a weekly thing. And on top of it, it is used, there's no inherent positive or negative slant to it. It's not like, this is used for describing positive things or negative things. As we get more into Japanese, we're going to see that there are lots of expressions that have an inherently usually negative focus to them. But this one does not. So we've got a few examples on the screen. So let's take a look. And you'll see that with both of these, we are using I'm going to call the base forms of the verb, either positive or negative. So with this first one, 仕事を休むことがあります. There are times when I'm absent from work, or I take a break from work. How often is this? Like, do I need to put percentage on it? If so, I don't know, 5%, 2%, maybe 10%, but it's not common. It's not a common thing. Now, this is not referring to any specific action that's happened in the past. So I'm not talking about, that time last week. And so we're not, even though this has probably happened in the past and will probably happen again in the future. I took a day off from work because I was sick. And then I presumably will be sick again. And so I'll take off another day someday. Despite this using past tense and present tense, we're talking about all time, generally speaking. The verb is going to stay there as yasumu, your dictionary form. And the second part of it, the koto ga aru, is in almost all situations, you're going to use the present tense. So that would be aru or arimasu, or if we're talking about the negative form, nai or arimasen. You do see it being used in the past, as in there were times that I so and so, but it's just simply in day-to-day conversation, it's not that common to hear that. But using it to describe the current situation, which includes the past and the future, that is much more common. So let's take a look at the rest of them. So again, you take off time, but it's rare. The second one, 朝ごはんを食べないことがある. Now look at this one. We took the action and we flipped it to the negative. So we're saying there are times, so look at our new expression, koto ga aru. It's positive, right? It's aru. It's not nai, it's aru. There are times when I don't eat breakfast. There are times when I don't eat breakfast. So we can use this to describe when actions don't happen. Again, you probably do eat breakfast, but sometimes you're just too busy and you don't. Maybe you have just a coffee and you take off. And that's okay. Now, we used arimasu. We used aru, again, casual, positive, or not positive, casual, polite, doesn't matter. And excuse me one sec. I still have a bit of a cough left over. I'm trying to keep you from having to listen to it. With this last one, look at this one. It's a bit longer, but let's just look at the back half of it for now. You can probably see my mouse. Let's not worry about why this worrying is taking place. But we've got this 心配することがない. So, 心配することがない. There's no time when this thing happens. So, let's look at the full sentence. お母さんがいるから. Mom is here or your mother is here, depending on who's speaking. Mom is here or your mother is here. So, I'm going to use the natural English and say there's no need to worry. There's no need to worry. But more literally, if we're really focusing on, how we described this before, mom is here. So there are no times when you worry. But, we don't say that in English. So we'd say there's no need to worry. But we're still carrying across the same meaning. Because mom is here, this action, this situation doesn't happen. So, before we continue on with our last chunk, I'd like to practice this one a little bit. And we've got a few different versions, but to keep our mental load low enough, I want to focus just on the first one. And if you'd like sharing with us something real or something made up, it doesn't matter. Tell us something that there are times where you do that. Or you could describe something that's not about you. You could be talking about someone else. You could be talking about something in the place where you live. So I'll give you a quick example. I live in Japan, as most of you know. And so I might say, oops, that's the wrong one. I might talk about earthquakes and say, there are times when earthquakes occur. And by the way, if you need help remembering the word okoru, it sounds so similar to occur, okoru, occur, that it makes it easy for me to hook those two together. So, it's not common, fortunately, but, we do. There are times that we have earthquakes, sometimes big, sometimes small. Now, there's one person just above me. And again, we'd love to have you participate and throw out examples, but again, it's not required. So I'm not going to say, hey, we need 3 more examples before we continue, and I'm going to pick people at random and say, you need to do it. There's none of that. But especially if you're in a Japanese learning class or you have been in one and you have that feeling of, oh, if I say something, I'm going to get instantly judged and all these eyeballs will be looking at me. No, you won't. Not here. We're just a group of learners. We have a really nice mix of different levels. And so, this is a great chance to toss something out. It's like, I'm 90% sure this is wrong, but I'm going to say it anyway. And then get a gentle correction without feeling that embarrassment of everyone staring at you. And for people that are using kanji, like myself, if you don't know what the kanji is, I haven't used this reaction in so long that it's not appearing for me in Renshu. There we go. Nope. If you use this little guy, not type it, but if you react to something with the little question mark, call question, it will give you the kanji for it. Or not the kanji. It will give you the furigana for the kanji. Now, interestingly, with the person that put 2 sentences up, these sentences might actually fit a little bit better with the grammar that we're about to use. So this is often used for describing an infrequent action or non-action that does happen sometimes. So if you say, tori o kau koto ga nai, that's in English, that's kind of like saying there are no times when I keep or I have a bird as a pet. Which there are times where you would use that, but not quite as common. That fits in a bit more with the sense of experience, as in I've never had a bird as a pet, or I've never been somewhere, or I've never eaten this. And we have the perfect expression for that coming up in like 4 or 5 minutes. This one is more commonly used for saying, okay, here's something that does happen sometimes. It's just not that often. Or using the negative form, here's... Oh, interesting. So for example, the person that just typed out, they put 仕事に車で行くことがある. So, real fast for anyone, the person that's talking about their job, how do you think they usually go to their job? What's your guess? Based on the sentence they just wrote, how do they usually go to their job? What do you think? Based on what they've written, we know that they have a job and that they are going to it. So, with a car, remember this one's used to describe something that is not common. It happens, but it's not common. So if they're saying 車で行くことがある, they're saying there are times when I go by car. Which ... is saying, but usually they're going by something else. We're describing a rare situation. So public transportation, maybe. They walk, they bike, they ski, they swim, who knows? But they're doing something else that's not by car, but there are times when they need to take a car. But I personally believe that when you, as people are typing, if anyone else is typing an example, I feel like making mistakes is ultimately much more valuable than getting something right. Because often when you get something right, when you say something correctly, you don't really have feedback as to whether or not what you said is actually correct. You don't have people, so if you say something in Japanese and it's correct, does the other person say, that was correct Japanese, I will now respond to you? Of course they don't. And so in your head, there's no reinforcement of this pattern I used was correct. It might have been wrong, but it was close enough to being right to where you got through, which is also very useful, but you don't have any actual reinforcement in terms of their reaction. But if you make something that is, wrong with a capital W, is it that just is not right, you usually will get from the other person a huh? Or they'll ask you the question again, or if you're in a classroom, they say, oh, that's not quite right, here's the right answer. That sticks in your head. And that is going back to the neurons. That's going to take those neurons in your head and tie them together a bit more tightly around the correct information, which is going to make your comprehension of it stronger, I think, than the person that said something but didn't get any feedback, positive or negative. So, in other words, I love mistakes. They help us learn. So I'm going to talk about the last sentence that came up. Someone said, there are times when I forget to take my medicine, which we've all had that. We've all had that happen. So we can all completely understand that. So a good example. Now we are short on time and we have one more section. And this one, we've actually gone from, I think, least common to most common in terms of expression. So let's jump into the one that is by far the most common. It's usually the one that's taught earliest in textbooks in terms of the ones we've talked about so far. And this is what we usually call the experience. We're talking about experiences now. And here in Renshu, we have verb past and then koto ga aru. You will often see it written like this. Instead of them mentioning the verb, if you're looking it up, especially in a Japanese dictionary, it'll have the ta at the beginning. And that ta is referring to the ta on the casual verb past form, yatta, kaita, or whatnot. Ta koto ga aru. Now, just now, we were using the dictionary form of the verbs. Well, positive or negative. We were talking about wasureru, talking about yomu, talking about nomu, iku. Here, we're switching over to the past tense. And we use that because we're talking about the past. We're talking about experience, things that we have or have not done. And it doesn't really matter when it happened. It doesn't matter how many times it happened, but the way it's translated into English is something like this. I have gone to Japan before. I have eaten sushi before. I have played the ukulele, whatever it happens to be. And you can see Renshu saying it's usually something that only happened occasionally. And if you think about that, that's no different from English. If you play soccer every day, you probably will not go to someone and say, yes, I have played soccer before. You'd say, I play soccer. I play it every day. So, generally speaking, this is for something that is not a common occurrence, not necessarily rare, but you're focusing on the fact that you have done it before. So let's take a look at some examples. And these are both very Japan specific. And you'll note that with both of these, the verb that comes before koto, and you have probably noticed that this has been the same for all the expressions we've used today. It's always the casual or the short form of the verb. You cannot say karaoke o utaimashita koto ga aru. You must say karaoke o utatta, that past casual form, koto ga aru. Now, of course, if you want the sentence to be in polite form, you can do that. You would just switch the verb on the end from aru to arimasu. So if you were talking to your boss has said, hey, I need someone to go to America. Have you ever been to America? And you're like, yes, I've been there before. You could use America ni itta koto ga arimasu. So when we're getting into these more and more complex grammar forms, there's usually rules as to how the verbs will appear inside the expression. It's always the verb at the end of the sentence that determines politeness, not what's happening anywhere else in the sentence. The ending verb is what says, hey, I'm polite, I'm being polite, I'm being formal, I'm being casual, whatever. So, karaoke o utatta koto ga aru. Quick question. Who here could say this? As in, you have sung karaoke before. If someone were to ask you that, they'd say, karaoke o utatta koto ga arimasu ka? Made it a question form. That would be the way you would respond. The main verb here is not sing. The main verb here is aru. We're talking about the presence or absence of that experience. So you could say, hai, arimasu, or ie, arimasen. Would be the most simple way of responding to this. You could give a larger, response and say, hai, utatta koto ga arimasu. In the same way that you could say, yes, I have, or you could say, yes, I have sung karaoke. They're both okay. For the second one, we're switching to the negative. So this is again experience, but we're talking about an experience that you haven't had. Hopefully this is not the case because riding the Shinkansen is awesome. But if you haven't ridden it yet, hopefully it's a yet for everyone here, you would say Shinkansen ni notta koto ga nai. Or if we're being more polite, we'd use that arimasen. Shinkansen ni notta koto ga nai. Now, this is the one spot that, throws people off. This whole, and let me type it out again. This is what we're learning. It's that ta koto ga aru. Notice that ta is right there at the beginning. That means you can't switch that out for anything else. We're never going to put the negative form of the verb here. This expression uses the past tense form of the verb, even if you were talking about something that you've never done. And if you think about it, if you step back and think about what's actually being said, it makes sense. Of course, since it's experience, we're talking about the past. And what do we do when we talk about past things? We use the past tense of the verb. And so, Shinkansen ni notta. This, I've ridden a Shinkansen in the past. What's the second half of the sentence say? No, that's not true. So I've ridden a Shinkansen in the past? Nope. Shinkansen ni notta koto ga nai. So you don't mess around with the expression itself. You always, when it comes to formality, when it comes to yes or no, you're going to be swapping what happens at the end. If you were to try and jam the negative form into the beginning, it wouldn't be grammatical, but it would kind of sound like I have never not ridden the Shinkansen before. Does that make sense? It's strange at best. So we're going to stick with the top form here and then describe whether you've done it or not with aru or with nai. Now this brings us to the end of the lesson. And so hopefully you'll be interested in taking these last couple of minutes to practice with me just a little bit. And I'd like to try each of these two. And I'm going to make it really easy. There's two ways that you can participate. One is using the top sentence and telling us something you've done before. So for example, I have been to Thailand before, many years ago. So I would say this. Tai ni itta koto ga aru. So you're free to put up your own original sentences. You can also take someone else's sentence for something that you haven't done. So maybe one of you are thinking, I've never been to Thailand. Take my sentence, take most of it, and then swap out that last verb and put nai. And then you're taking that and you're making the sentence your own, which is totally okay. It's a great thing to do. And I'm of the mindset that any kind of practice is, better than no practice. So one person says they've been camping before. Very small change. You're going to take the verb and drop the small tsu out of there. You don't need that. Just campushita. Oh, there you go. The other person, I get the feeling, I know this person well enough to say they're probably saying this with a bit of regret. Neko ni natta koto ga nai. I've never become a cat. Someone else has never had tempura before. We have maybe 1 or 2 more minutes. So let's see if we can get a few more examples out. Someone's been to Switzerland before. Someone gave us a double sentence. That's nice. They've had soba before, and it was good. I'm personally more of an udon person, but they're both excellent. I see some good senses. A lot more people participating, which is great. Thank you. Now, as people are finishing up, let me just mention that this video will be available inside of Renshu later on. If you don't know where it is, I'll show you real fast. You can go to the resources menu. Mine looks a bit different because I'm on the web version, but still in there in the app. And if you go to Japanese lessons, it will, once Kao-chan stops dancing, it'll be down here under N4, and all lessons that have a little video mark, you just tap that video mark and you can view the video. So if you need to go back and check this out later on, it's right there for you. Anyway, thank you so much for everyone's time. I really appreciate you spending it with us. And hopefully you got something out of today's lesson. So definitely give these a shot. I know that when you get a lot of kind of similar sounding, even if the meanings are quite different. You know, we did koto ga dekiru. We got two versions of koto ga aru. It can take time to parse those outside of your head. You can say, I understand each of them by themselves, but then I get them all jumbled up when I try and use them. That confusion will pass. It's mainly, you know, something that takes time and exposure to have those get hammered into your head more. But yeah, you'll get there. You definitely will. And I hope you will join us for next time's lesson. So, have a good day, everyone.